Kia ora everyone, welcome back. I'm Jo Carpenter if you're just joining us now, and we're going to kick off the session very quick because I know Susan's got a lot of material to present. So I'll hand over to you now, Susan.
Cool, thank you, Jo. Kia ora koutou, and you can see that. Give me a thumbs up.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. All right, so this talk by me, Josh, Graham, Georgina, and Robbie, I'm going to just leap straight in and say, was always the first slide. We have some givens about shiprat populations. They're usually bigger in warm, more productive forests. They usually increase whenever and wherever food supply is increased. For example, shiprats can peak at very high densities after mass seed falls in cold forests, and they can also increase after aerial 1080 operations, which effectively increase food supply by removing shiprats and possums, as I showed in our last workshop in March 2022. But Dave Kelly's presentation in that 2022 workshop suggested that shiprat populations may also increase when stoats are controlled by trapping, and that result has now been published by Kelly Fito and others in 2023. And that result is a bit of a spanner in the works because for years the question of whether stoat trapping released rats, an outcome technically called mesopredator release, seemed reasonably settled, and the answer was generally no. Grant Blackwell and others had followed shiprats with and without stoats through a mast in North Island forests. Removing stoats made no difference early or in the peak of the rat eruption, although they did say that the role of stoats in the decline and low phases of rat cycles was still unclear. Then Chris Jones and others looked at DOCS data from Okarito and estimated that a stoat could kill a maximum of 0.15 rats per day, not enough to make a difference, they reckoned. And then in a formal experiment in North Island podocarp forest, Wendy Rusco and others found that trapping stoats had no effect on shiprats. And so that was a Backy experiment and pretty reliable. So the finding by Fito and others that stoat trapping released rats in the beech forests of northwest Nelson was contrary to what was a sort of prevailing paradigm of bottom-up dominance in the control of shiprats. The basic idea that the bottom-up driver food is much more important for shiprats than predation, the top-down effect. And if food is everything, then there's no reason to think that trapping stoats is going to make much difference to rat populations and, of course, to the subsequent damage that rats do to native fauna. In this talk, I'm going to suggest we might be able to reconcile the contradictions about the effect of about rat release by stoat trapping using a framework in which we expect the strength of bottom-up and top-down control of shiprats to vary with background productivity of the system and change over time with resource and management cycles across New Zealand's complex forests. And borrowing a leaf out of Josh's book, I've summed up my thesis in poetry, a couple of rhymes. Shiprats in austerity succumb to stoats more readily, and trapping stoats relieves rats more when and where those rats are poor. We've got a background spatial distribution of shiprat austerity. As we've heard today, our warmer forests are more ratty, there's more food, which means lower per capita predation by stoats. Stoat predation should not be able to make much of a dent in a rat population in a wealthy, strongly bottom-up dominated system because happy, fecund rats can readily compensate with rapid recruitment. At the other extreme, rats are suffering austerity in cold forests. There are fewer of them, and the same number of stoats eating 0.15 rats per day is going to have a bigger proportional impact on the small food-constrained rat population. We'd expect top-down effects to be stronger in these places. And then superimposed, there are cycles of wealth and austerity in time. At least two types of cycles occur to me. We've got a mass-driven eruption cycle on the left and an aerial management-driven cycle on the right. The lines on these plots are medians derived from models of actual shiprat tracking rates in mixed beech forests. So they represent the sort of thing we really observe. Time goes along the bottom in each, and shiprat tracking's on the vertical. The colours, as in all my slides, are background temperature with cooler, usually austere environments down here in the blues, and the warmer colours being the more bounteous, ratty environments. At zero in the mass-driven cycle, we get this pulse of resource into the system and we get an eruption followed by a crash. And you can see that really steep crash in the austere environments. At zero in the aerial management cycle, most rats and possums are dead. In this vacuum of competition for food, rats then recover rapidly, especially in the warmer forests, and we get a period called the rat bounce, when tracking rates become higher than in unmanaged forests. And at the end of that cycle, just as in the eruption cycle, the rat party comes to an end, food's no longer as plentiful, competition for resources sets in, and then eventually ship rats settle back into their long-run medians according to the background wealth or poverty of that environment. My key point is that forests go through cycles of wealth and austerity for ship rats. Rats will be rich sometimes, bottom-up dominance will be stronger, other times they'll be poor, and top-down predation is going to be more influential. Before I leave these cycles, I'll note that in the bust times, when rats are prone to succumb to stoats more readily, there are going to be more stoats to succumb to. On this slide, the top row of plots shows how stoats respond to these two types of cycles through time. So, as we've heard, stoats breed more slowly than rodent prey, and after a mast event, they just can't respond until the following summer. So you see these sort of this period of vacuum, and then this delayed spike in stoats. After aerial management, the predator vacuum is quite extended because 1080 usually kills stoats very effectively. In beech forests, at least, stoat activity is very low for at least 2 years after operations, and then the old stoats increase again. So given that framework of places and times of ship rat austerity, I'm going to make 3 predictions about where and when ship rats will succumb to stoats more readily, and when and where stoat trapping may release them. So the first is just a simple spatial prediction that stoats should reduce ship rat tracking rates proportionally more in colder forests. The second is a prediction about timing, that stoats should make less difference to ship rats in the period of after an aerial management operation when there's less austerity and more food around. And thirdly, the release of ship rats by stoat trapping should be greater when and where food is scarce, and we would predict in those places stronger top-down control of rats by stoats, and so removing stoats should actually release rats more. To test the first 2 predictions, I've picked 1 year out of DOC's massive tracking data set and looked really hard at it, and that year was 2019. And the data here were records from about 600 tracking lines in pure and mixed beech forests, and they're shown on this map as the black symbols. So right up and down the country, not the northern North Island, but there you go. And these were set baited for stoats over 21 days in summer, and then overnight and baited for ship rats in that following winter. So some of these lines were treated with aerial 1080 in the 2016 beech forest eruption after that mast event, and we've called these unmanaged. And if they weren't treated with aerial 1080 in 2016, they were called unmanaged. And we fitted a model of rat tracks in response to forest type, temperature, management, and whether stoats were present or absent in the summer. And this plot shows the ship rat tracking rates that the model predicted in unmanaged mixed beech forests in that winter of 2019. So in this figure, temperature is along the bottom. So as usual, there were more winter rats in the warmer mixed beech forests. This red line is the tracking rate predicted where stoats were definitely present the previous summer. So this line is lower than the black line where there were no summer stoats. And so having stoats around certainly suppressed ship rat tracking rates. This plot here on the right shows that suppression as a percentage. So it's the same data, but it's just converting it to a percentage reduction. So the lower the line, the bigger the relative effect of summer stoats. So this model supports our prediction that stoats would reduce ship rat activity proportionally more in colder places. You can see it's 30 to 40% reduction in the cold places and a 10 to 15 in the warm places. On this slide, the dotted line, this one, is the percent reduction fitted by the model when there had been an aerial management operation in 2016. And you can see that the reduction is smaller. Summer stoats suppressed ship rats less after an aerial management operation, and that suppression, that was especially in the warmer forests. It didn't seem to matter that much in the colder forests. Now, in those managed forests, we would have been in the middle of this aerial management cycle with a rat bounce in full swing, the timing indicated by the yellow arrow here. And there would have been more food around in an unmanaged forest. There were certainly more ship rats. And so this model also supports our prediction that stoats make less difference where food is abundant and is boosting a ship rat population. Which leads to the third prediction, and here I'm going to ask whether stoat trapping is more likely to release ship rats in the places where food and hence ship rats are scarce. To look at this, George collected stoat trapping records in places where there were also extensive networks of tracking tunnels. So this was a massive job, that collation, and a huge thank you to everyone who helped out and gave us their trapping data. We were pretty certain by the time we wrapped up that we'd managed to gather data on all of the trapping carried out in these two large chunks of South Island country, Fiordland on the left and Kahurangi on the right, between 2012 and 2021. And you can see that Fiordland's quite big. It goes all the way up to the Landsborough in southwestland. The insets here show the locations of the tunnels in those areas, which were far more widespread than the trap lines. And so that gives us a lot of control observations in untrapped forests that we can compare to the trap lines. George converted stoat trapping effort to traps set per kilometre of line per season. And Robbie then created buffer zones with effort decaying for 650 metres on each side of each line. And we then intercepted the tracking data and fitted models to both shiprat and stoat tracking data collected at those tunnels, and trapping effort was one of our predictors in those models, along with time, environment, and aerial management. So a bit of a complicated process. And these are the tracking rates of ship rats and mustelids predicted by those models in each summer and in the absence of aerial management and without any stoat trapping at all. So you can see that stoat tracking predictions in the lower rows, these are 21-day tracking rates, and they start a bit later because 21-day tunnels only started in about 2013. And the different colors, as in all my slides, are different temperature zones, the warm colors being warmer. And you can see at a glance that these two chunks are quite different chunks of country. Kahurangi is a lot warmer and a lot rattier, even in the cooler parts of Kahurangi. Fiordland has far fewer rats, so even in the warmer parts of Fiordland, these are obviously pretty austere environments for rats. But both areas have really good temperature gradients to look at. And interestingly, overall, stoat tracking rates, the lower plots in the unmanaged parts of Fiordland and Kahurangi, were quite similar. And they increased a lot in both places, especially from 2019. So there was a bit of a stoat party going on towards the end there. And these are the median differences made by stoat trapping. So these are the results. The difference made by stoat trapping to ship rat tracking rates in the upper row again, and to mustelid tracking rates in the lower row. So these are differences made not at some theoretical level of stoat trapping, but at the levels and rates of stoat trapping that were actually observed in the zones along the trap lines. And that effort wasn't steady, but it actually increased over time in both regions. So what you're seeing is what we think we actually got. Symbols below a line indicate suppression. So below a zero line there and that zero line here. Symbols above the line are evidence in the shiprat row of mesopredator release, that trapping stoats led to an increase in shiprat activity. So looking at that lower row, the stoats, the mustelid tracking rates first, it's perhaps reassuring that those mustelid tracking rates were reduced with stoat trapping pretty much everywhere. And as the effort increased over the years, the effect was bigger. So that's pretty reassuring. We are actually getting an effect. We're actually looking at data that made a difference. And the results for ship rats, I think, are really intriguing. So they show that ship rat tracking rates increased with stoat trapping in Fiordland, except in 2012 when there actually wasn't that much stoat trapping. So everywhere in Fiordland and also in the cooler parts of Kahurangi, you can see these dots above the line. It's not a huge difference, but it does suggest that in these places there was some mesopredator release. The big surprise from these data is here. Our prediction was for less mesopredator release in warmer places, but we did not expect stoat trapping to actually suppress rats. So this was a surprise that rat tracking actually decreased with stoat trapping in warmer Kahurangi. So on this slide, I've put the effects on summer ship rat tracking rates in Fiordland onto a common effort scale. So this is the scale down at the bottom here. And it's seriously nonlinear. It's a square root scale to emphasize this left-hand side of the axis where most of the effort, most of the realistic effort was. So here the plot on the left is the cooler parts of Fiordland. These are the warmer parts of Fiordland. The vertical axis on each is the ship rat tracking rate, and the curves up mean mesopredator release. The more stoat trapping equals higher ship rat tracking rates. And the 10 spaghetti strands are the different summers of data in different colors. So you can see how much both the background rates of rat tracking and the effects, those different curves, varies from year to year and with temperature. So it's a very complex story. An important point is that stoat trapping effort that was actually expended in any temperature zone in a given year was generally low. And so I've put numbers in parentheses here that are the median trapping rates that were actually within that zone within that summer, which tell us that even with this seriously nonlinear scale, realistic amounts of stoat trapping are really on the left. And the take home from that is that those effects are generally pretty small. In most places, especially in cold places, the difference that stoat trapping made was almost invisible. And this is my final slide, and it's the same thing but showing how stoat trapping affected ship rat tracking in Kahurangi. So in cooler forests, that's in Kahurangi, on the left, we see mesopredator release. The curves up mean higher ship rat tracking rates where stoats were trapped in colder forests. But realistic trapping effort, these numbers here, was very low up high in Kahurangi. And so those effects are likely to have been right down here, very modest in practice. And then in warmer forests on the right, these downward curves, those show us our surprisingly actually lower ship rat tracking rates where there's stoat trapping. Now, we don't know what the suppression is all about, or at least I don't. Maybe the stoat traps are catching rats. Maybe stoat trapping is increasing another carnivore, such as feral cats, which the ship rats are more frightened of. But when you look at these graphs, there's certainly no evidence of mesopredator release happening in those warmer Kahurangi forests. So I think if we step back to our prediction, these results are broadly consistent with our idea that trapping stoats relieves rats more where rats are poor. To sum up then, differences in forest productivity and in timing may explain some of the conflicting evidence about the mesopredator release of ship rats by stoat trapping. When we looked, we found that stoats suppressed ship rat activity more in cooler forests and at the times when there was comparatively less food. Conversely, they suppressed ship rat activity less in warmer places and in the rat bounce after a 1080 operation. And stoat trapping released ship rats in the cool, austere forests in Fiordland and in cooler parts of Kahurangi, but not in the warmest forests that we investigated. But under most realistic levels of stoat trapping effort, the mesopredator release of ship rats by stoat trapping is, as certainly as we recorded it as a change in activity, pretty small compared to the bottom-up effects on ship rats set off by mast and aerial management cycles, and also those big variations we get across space in New Zealand's complex forests. Thank you very much. And I'll leave you with the poetry.
Thank you, Susan. That was a huge amount of work and material to pack into one talk, and I think you did it really clearly. Um, we might have time for just one very quick question. Um, Colin O'Donnell has asked, have you got any insights on how impactful the rat release might be?
No, no, Colin, I don't. And I suspect, given that it's worst, I guess, in the cold places, that it's going to be most impactful on the species that are up there and really dependent on those cold places. And so, even while the differences are small, from stoat trapping, that is, um, I think that's where they may make a difference. And I'll also just point out, while I'm on the line, that the effects that stoats are making was quite a lot bigger than the effects that stoat trapping was making. So I think that's because we don't remove all the stoats. And so again, that effect will be bigger. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.